The US is set to, quote, wage war on narco-terrorist organizations. That remark from Secretary of State Marco Rubio just a day after a US military strike on a boat allegedly carrying drugs from Venezuela. The US has offered no evidence about who or what was on that boat, but Rubio suggested the military took the most effective action.
Let me say this. The United States has long, for many, many years, established intelligence that allow us to interdict and stop drug boats. And we did that. And it doesn't work. Interdiction doesn't work because these drug cartels, what they do is they know they're going to lose, 2% of their cargo. They bake it into their economics. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them.
President Trump suggests the strike is an unmistakable warning to drug traffickers in the region. He said, quote, a lot of other people won't be doing it again. The week's events have heightened tensions with Venezuela and President Nicolas Maduro, who President Trump claims is in control of a notorious criminal organization overseeing the drug trade. CNN contributor Stefano Possebon is in Caracas with more details.
There is still a lot of questions unanswered around the news that was broken by the President of the United States, saying that the United States took out or blew up a speedboat with 11 alleged drug traffickers that was traveling from Venezuela, and we understand that the strike occurred on international waters. We are in a country that has seen, of course, growing US pressures in the last few weeks. We're talking about at least 7 warships, as well as 1 nuclear-powered submarine that are roaming around the southern Caribbean Sea in front of the coast of Venezuela. But if you come here to Caracas, you don't really feel like this is a country in high tension. You can see that we are in a suburb that is quite actually close to the Caribbean Sea, and life goes on as usual. Of course, it's a crisis. It's a country that is still dealing with a deep economic crisis, and it's still a country that is working under an anti-democratic government. However, it doesn't feel like that war is exploding or is coming to these streets. And that is also the message that I think the Maduro's government is trying to put out, not just to its own people, but to the international community as well.
Joining me now to discuss this is Christopher Sabatini, a senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, Rosemary.
So it was dramatic video, 11 people killed in a US strike on an alleged drug vessel in the Caribbean. But where's the proof, and how risky is a deadly strike compared to an arrest and seizure of drugs that requires verification?
There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, this is a real new and dangerous step on the part of U.S. drug interdiction efforts to shoot first and ask questions later. The video is out. It's been verified by independent sources, but it's 11 people on a speedboat that, first of all, speedboats carrying drugs don't tend to have 11 people. But second, Trump claims that it was heading to the United States, and there is no way a speedboat of that size could make it from Venezuela across the Caribbean to the United States. So there's that. But again, do we really need 7 naval ships off the coast of Venezuela to interdict individual boats, speedboats mostly, of 11 or fewer people? So it's both a risky violation of international laws governing interdiction of drugs, certainly U.S. protocol on interdicting drugs, but also it's really, if you will, sort of hitting a small nail with a large sledgehammer. This is a really ridiculous, out-of-scope policy for boats of that size, and probably will continue at this rate.
And given that, how dangerous is a strike like this in terms of triggering a conflict or potentially triggering a conflict in the region, with US Secretary of State Rubio saying the US is set to wage war on narco-terrorist organizations?
It's very risky. First of all, again, the shoot first, ask questions policy makes it even more risky because typically these boats are boarded, they check for drugs, and then they're arrested and the drugs are seized. So we don't know, again, if this boat was in fact a drug. Let's take the government's word for it. But in the future, this policy of just shooting at boats that seem to be speeding somewhere risks that it could, first of all, take out boats that are laden with human traffic, if you will, sort of undocumented immigrants. It could also risk taking out regular fishing boats or even military boats that could suddenly escalate the conflict with the Venezuelan government and really turn this into a much larger conflagration than certainly Marco Rubio and Peter Hegseth are pretending it could. But there's also the issue here is, what are the boats really there for? And I argue that the boats are effectively there really to try to scare the Maduro government into basically collapsing or resigning and setting the stage for or some form of transition. I don't think it would be a democratic transition, certainly directed by those generals around Maduro. But this is more than just the drug interdiction efforts that Marco Rubio and others have claimed. This is really a larger policy of regime change.
You think it's that extreme? I mean, you talked about this overreach. You clearly feel that this type of strike raises questions about the intended mission of the U.S. naval operations off the coast of Venezuela. And there's been a lot of speculation from it being a drug operation to the possibility of an invasion and many things in between. But that seems extreme. What's your basis for that understanding of what could be going on here?
I don't think an invasion is likely. There are only about 4,000 military personnel on those boats in the submarine. I think it's more about potentially taking out individual targets, both in the ocean as well as potentially inside through drone attacks and the like. But it's also to send a signal. The administration has made very clear that they consider this government of Maduro illegitimate, and indeed it is. It stole the elections last year. It has made very clear that it wants him out. It doubled the bounty on his head to $50 million. And it's also, leaked this document that is giving free license to the Pentagon to take out those it is designated as heads of terror narco cartels, and it named high-level officials of the Maduro government those sorts of terrorists. So this is really about trying to rattle the government. It's not about to intervene, but for a long time, the Trump administration has bargained, including in its first term, that what it can do is ramp up economic sanctions, try to ramp up political pressure internationally and domestically in the hopes that the military elements of the military will defect to remove Maduro. This is just taking this the next step. An invasion isn't likely. There could be more targeted kinetic attacks, but this is really about saber rattling.
Now, Maduro is not particularly popular in the South American region, but if the Trump administration were to move forward and try to take him out in some way or some change of regime, what would be the tolerance across South America for that?
There raises a whole series of questions, Rosemary. First of all, within the country, you're right. Probably in the stolen elections of last year, Maduro got less than 30%, which he claimed, but probably far less. So within the country, he's deeply unpopular. But any sort of effort to take out a head of state or even take out, a sort of selected type strike that we saw, for example, in Syria and Iraq against ISIS, would certainly rattle the entire regional community. You would see governments from Brazil to Colombia speak out against violations of national sovereignty. It would basically shatter U.S. relations and trust within the hemisphere, which are already severely weakened. So it would trigger a reaction. No one really wants to look like they're embracing Maduro or defending him, but they'll defend national sovereignty because that's a fundamental international norm.
Christopher Sabatini, many thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.